A 911 call comes in. Officers are dispatched. What happens next can turn into a life or death situation. And more police say that situation now often includes someone with a mental illness.
Police chiefs across the state say these kinds of calls are on the rise, but most of their officers aren't trained to deal with them. News Center's Danielle Waugh is here with a special report on policing Maine's mentally ill. Danielle?
Well, Pat and Cindy, advocates for Maine's mentally ill say that police training really can mean the difference between life and death. And one of the most recent examples in our state happened in South Berwick.
She really is gone, and the way that it ended, I don't think was anything any of us ever would have imagined.
Pam Benedetto has been replaying it over and over in her mind. The way her friend Karen Moeller died, and if it could have been prevented.
I think I'm still in a state of shock.
On December 4th, Karen Moeller made a phone call to her doctor. She was having a mental health crisis, and she had a gun. She was suicidal. While talking her down, her doctor called police from York and South Berwick, and for Karen Moeller, that made things worse.
It was probably just fear. And then I think when she realized that the police were involved, I think the situation just escalated to a point that she never imagined.
She related she had a handgun.
Police logs show Moeller told her doctor she had unloaded her gun, but police couldn't confirm it.
So we knew that we had a real threat.
Police put down spike mats, so when Moeller tried to drive away, she couldn't get far. Her car stopped, she got out with the gun drawn, and one officer from each department shot her. She died at the scene. She was 55 years old.
And we worry a lot about the number of shootings that happen in the state of Maine that involve individuals who have a mental illness.
The numbers tell the story. Since the year 2000, 42% of police shootings involved someone with a mental illness, according to the Attorney General's office. The National Alliance on Mental Illness in Maine will not comment specifically on Karen Moeller's death, especially because it is still under investigation by the Attorney General's office.
Some of the traditional policing techniques, which are very, appropriate in certain situations, just make the situation more complicated when you're dealing with a person with mental illness.
NAMI says crisis intervention training, or CIT, can mean the difference between life and death for people with mental illness. It's a 40-hour course that teaches police how to recognize mental health crisis calls and de-escalate the situation. Training that the two officers who shot Karen Moeller did not have.
He had training, let me put it that way. CIT, no.
And most police officers don't, partly because it costs money and partly because there is no requirement in Maine to have police officers trained in CIT or even take a more basic 8-hour course called Mental Health First Aid.
We don't have the skills to be able to exactly diagnose what's wrong with someone.
Officer Christopher Gay works with NAMI to teach CIT courses. He sees the importance of mental health training every single day.
I've been with the Augusta PD for almost 9 years. I've had to actively draw my weapon on someone once. I've been in 2-foot pursuits. In each year, I deal with somewhere between 600 and 800 mental health calls, just myself.
CIT teaches officers that things like loud voices and quick responses can escalate a crisis call, and it teaches them de-escalation techniques. State police are about 10% CIT certified. According to NAMI records, 78 police departments have at least one officer trained. For everyone else, the baseline of training comes from a 7-hour course at the academy.
But they get 1 day of mental health training, and they probably get a couple hours worth of time from me. That's all that they get to go out into the field.
NAMI Maine wants to see every officer go through a refresher course, the 8-hour class called Mental Health First Aid, and then have each jurisdiction have 20% of their force get CIT certified. A bill by Representative Richard Malaby would make that a mandate.
I mean, it may be somewhat of an aspirational goal to say that 20% of law enforcement are going to be trained in it, but it's my goal that it would happen to all law enforcement throughout the state of Maine.
And in a perfect world, if we had the money to send every officer tomorrow, we would.
While DHHS funds the CIT training, it's up to police departments to cover the officers' shifts and pay for the overtime. Chief Bracey says he recently sent 5 officers to CIT. and it cost the department $5,500 in overtime.
Is the cost better put up front? I mean, I can tell you that if you ask any police chief in the state, if we think there's enough mental health resources out there, and especially crisis beds, forensic beds, there isn't.
Advocates say there needs to be a multifaceted approach, but say police training is a critical component.
Without really sort of the mindset of how do we be aware, reduce our own stigma, understand mental illness, and respond to it appropriately, then people will die who shouldn't die. People will be incarcerated who shouldn't be incarcerated. Officers will be injured who didn't need to be injured.
The more training they have can only benefit in situations like this. And I know, Karen's gone, but there's also 2 police officers that are still here dealing with the after effects of this.
Representative Malaby's bill would increase the CIT budget for DHHS from $90,000 to $150,000. He says his goal is to have 20% of officers trained by the year 2017. Pat and Cindy.
Thank you,
Very
Danielle.
interesting. Thank you.